Battle of Hattin, the vengeance at the horns of Hattin. What happens when a rogue Crusader baron decides to raid Mecca-bound caravans like it's his personal hobby? Why did a Muslim leader, admired by his enemies and beloved by his people, swear to kill a man with his own hand and then actually do it? And how did one battle, fought under a scorching sun and choking smoke, shatter the Crusader kingdom and change the fate of Jerusalem forever? This isn't just a story of swords and sand. So if you've ever wondered how one man's arrogance could doom an entire kingdom, or how a leader's vision could reshape a continent, this is the story you've been waiting for. Let's dive in. The late 11th century was a chaotic dinner party where no one agreed on the menu. The Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt was wheezing its last breaths, and the Seljuk Empire, once a mighty force, was fracturing like a dropped vase. Muslim rulers squabbled, warlords carved out territories, and the Levant was a buffet of opportunity. Enter the First Crusade, stage left, with European knights who brought not just swords, but feudal institutions, Latin bishops, and a whole lot of arrogance. They carved out kingdoms, like Jerusalem, Antioch, and Tripoli, and ruled with surprising stability, thanks mostly to the fact that their Muslim neighbors were too busy arguing to mount a proper resistance. But by the mid-12th century, the tide began to turn. In 1144, Imad ad-Din Zengi, a formidable warlord of the Zengid dynasty, captured Edessa, shocking Christendom and prompting the Pope to call for the Second Crusade. It was a disaster for the Europeans, but a turning point for the Muslim world. Zengi was assassinated in 1146, but his son Nur ad-Din picked up the torch. He expanded his father's realm, brought stability, and most importantly, mentored a young man named Saladin. Saladin, born in 1137 in Tikrit, grew up in Damascus surrounded by scholars, poets, and theologians. He studied Greek philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and Islamic law. But above all, he immersed himself in the Quran. His family were seasoned diplomats and administrators, and his uncle Shirkuh, a grizzled military commander, became his mentor. From Shirkuh and Nur ad-Din, Saladin absorbed the values of chivalry, justice, humility, and mercy, a cocktail of virtues that would define his legacy. At 14, Saladin joined the military. By the 1160s, he was a rising star. When Nur ad-Din decided to intervene in the crumbling Fatimid Caliphate to block King Amalric I of Jerusalem from expanding into Egypt, Saladin was sent as second-in-command to his uncle Shirkuh. In 1169, Amalric was expelled. Shirkuh became vizier of Egypt and promptly died a month later. The Fatimid Caliph al-Adid, thinking he could control the young Saladin, appointed him vizier. Big mistake. Saladin, now 31, began a quiet revolution. He placed loyal family members in key positions, consolidated power, and in 1171 dissolved the Fatimid Caliphate, founding the Ayyubid dynasty. Egypt became a Sunni stronghold, and Saladin got to work. Revitalizing the economy, building schools and law colleges, abolishing tolls for pilgrims, rebuilding the navy, creating a new army loyal only to him, expanding into Nubia, Libya, and Yemen. He turned Egypt into a cultural and military powerhouse, and his grip on the Red Sea trade routes made him richer than a Venetian merchant with a monopoly on silk. Naturally, all this empire building made Nur ad-Din nervous. Tensions simmered until 1174, when Nur ad-Din died suddenly. His son, As-Salih, was just 11 years old and not exactly ready to lead a jihad. Saladin saw his moment. He proclaimed the need for unity and holy war and began absorbing Zengid territories through diplomacy and force. By the end of the year, he was Sultan of Egypt and Syria. Meanwhile, King Amalric I of Jerusalem died of dysentery, a very medieval way to go, and the throne passed to Baldwin IV, a boy afflicted with leprosy. The Crusader kingdom was now a Game of Thrones episode, nobles jockeying for power, alliances shifting, and the threat of invasion fading. But Saladin wasn't ready to strike. He needed to deal with Nur ad-Din's relatives in Aleppo and Mosul first. In 1177, Saladin launched a bold invasion into the Kingdom of Jerusalem. But Baldwin IV, now 16, teamed up with the infamous Raynald of Chatillon and caught Saladin off guard at Montchazard. It was a disaster. Saladin barely escaped with his life. His army was decimated. But Baldwin couldn't capitalize. His kingdom lacked the resources. Saladin regrouped. In 1179, he struck back, defeated Baldwin in the Golan, crushed another Crusader army in June, destroyed a Templar fortress in August. By 1180, both sides agreed to a 2-year truce. Saladin used the time wisely, strengthening his empire, building alliances, and preparing for the moment that would define his legacy. Now pause for a sec. Step into the extraordinary. Subscribe to Eccentric Digital Pixel. Welcome to the wild frontier of creativity, where pixels pulse with imagination and every frame tells a story you've never seen before. We don't follow trends. We bend reality. Get exclusive access to jaw-dropping digital creations. Be the first to witness new drops by turning on notifications. Don't just scroll. Experience the pixel revolution. Smash that subscribe button and ring the bell to never miss a masterpiece. Because normal is boring, and you were born to see the world differently. Even before the ink dried on the truce between Saladin and the Crusader states, one fortress stood out like a sore thumb, wrapped in chainmail. Kerak. Perched atop a steep hill, with an 80-meter entrance tunnel and walls thick enough to laugh off siege weapons, Kerak was the medieval equivalent of a villain's lair. And who lived there? None other than Raynald of Chatillon, a man who made truce sound like a suggestion. Kerak sat on the key road between Damascus and Mecca, and Raynald treated it like his personal toll booth. Pilgrims and traders passing by were taxed, raided, and robbed. Raynald didn't care if there was a truce. In his view, Muslims shouldn't be allowed to pass freely. Period. In the summer of 1181, Raynald rode deep into Arabia, like a man auditioning for the role of Most Wanted. He intercepted a major Muslim caravan, stripped the travelers of their possessions, and took many prisoners. Saladin, understandably furious, demanded compensation from King Baldwin IV. But Baldwin couldn't control Raynald, who was basically the medieval version of a rogue warlord with diplomatic immunity. Saladin retaliated by holding Christian pilgrims hostage in Damietta, hoping to trade them for the Muslim captives. Raynald refused, so Saladin sold the Christian pilgrims into slavery. Diplomacy, Medieval Edition. In 1182, Raynald decided to up the ante. He sent troops via the Red Sea, declaring he would destroy the Kaaba and exhume the Prophet Muhammad's tomb. Subtlety was not his strong suit, but Saladin had been busy reforming Egypt's navy. His brother Al-Adil, governor of Egypt, dispatched the Ayyubid fleet. The Christian raiders were captured and executed. Saladin's reputation soared. He was hailed as the protector of Islam, the defender of holy places, and the man who made Raynald look like a cartoon villain. In 1183, Saladin captured Aleppo, completing his transformation from regional power to supreme Muslim ruler. He now controlled Egypt and Syria, was backed by the Sunni Caliph in Baghdad, and recognized as the patron of Mecca and Medina. More importantly, ordinary Muslims rejoiced. After decades of division, Islam was united under one banner, and that banner was Saladin's. The news of Aleppo's fall sent shockwaves through the Crusader states. Saladin now had the resources to pressure the Kingdom of Jerusalem from every direction. He launched devastating raids and tested the defenses of Kerak, putting the Franks on edge. To make matters worse, Baldwin IV, the leper king, died. His final act was to send Raymond of Tripoli to negotiate a 4-year truce, which Saladin accepted. He had his own problems with the Zengid ruler in Mosul. But Baldwin's successor, Baldwin V, was a sickly child who died within a year. A succession crisis followed, and the throne passed to Baldwin IV's sister, who crowned her husband Guy of Lusignan as king. Guy couldn't control his nobles. And then came the worst news of all. In December 1186, Raynald violated the truce. Again, he attacked another rich caravan, slaughtered and imprisoned many Muslims. Saladin sent an envoy demanding the return of hostages and treasure. Raynald refused to even receive the messenger. Saladin's patience snapped like a bowstring. He swore to kill Raynald with his own hand. The time for diplomacy was over. In early 1187, Saladin gathered his generals in Damascus. Messengers galloped across the realm. The words jihad and Jerusalem echoed in every mosque and marketplace. Saladin left garrisons to guard the northern flank and began raiding Christian lands. During one raid, his cavalry encountered a Crusader force at the Springs of Cresson, 130 knights, 400 Turcopoles, and infantry. It was a massacre. Templar and Hospitaller heads were paraded on lances. Prisoners were chained to horses and marched through Tiberias. The Christians finally realized this was no skirmish. This was war. On June 26, 1187, Saladin assembled 30,000 troops divided into three wings, Taqi al-Din on the right, Gukburi on the left, Saladin in the center. They camped near Lake Tiberias, sending raiding parties to ravage Christian territory. The Crusaders, numbering 20,000, camped at Safuria, a strategic location with rich water resources. On June 30th, Saladin moved his camp closer to Safuria, challenging the Crusaders. When they didn't respond, he made the first move. On July 2nd, Saladin marched east with infantry, cavalry, and siege engineers. By late morning, they reached Tiberias, where Raymond's wife was staying. The town was besieged and captured by nightfall. Raymond's wife barricaded herself in the citadel and sent messengers to King Guy, pleading for help. Smoke rose over Tiberias. Guy convened a war council. Raymond urged caution. Stay at Safuria, hold the high ground. But Gerard de Ridfort, the Templar master, and Raynald of Chatillon pushed for action. Guy, swayed by their arguments, ordered the army to march at dawn. On July 3rd, the Crusader army set out. Raymond led the vanguard. King Guy marched in the center with the True Cross. Balian of Ebelin commanded the rearguard with the Templars and Hospitallers. The sun rose over a cloudless sky. The heat was brutal. Dust choked the air. By midday, they reached Turin, only a third of the way. As they pressed on, Saladin's horse archers appeared from the hills, harassing the column and cutting off their retreat. The trap was closing. The Battle of Hattin was about to begin. As the Crusader infantry closed ranks to shield their cavalry from Saladin's relentless hit-and-run attacks, the toll began to mount. Men and horses collapsed under the scorching sun, arrows rained like locusts, and the rearguard slowed to a crawl, eventually separating from the main column. Fearing the loss of his elite shock cavalry, King Guy ordered the center to halt and sent word to Raymond of Tripoli to stop the vanguard. But it was too late. The entire Crusader column was now encircled by Saladin's horse archers, who had multiplied like shadows in the dust. After swiftly capturing Tiberias, Saladin had returned with his main force, leaving only a small garrison to contain the citadel. Now he blocked the road ahead. With nightfall approaching, the Crusaders, parched, exhausted, and hemmed in, had no choice but to make camp where they stood. Their column stretched nearly 2 kilometers, exposed and vulnerable. Muslim skirmishers harassed them throughout the night, setting tents ablaze and peppering the camp with arrows. Smoke choked the air. Water was scarce. Sleep was impossible. The Crusaders were being slow roasted in their own despair. Morning came, but it brought no relief. Saladin waited for the heat to rise, knowing the sun would do half his work. The Crusaders, desperate for water, set their sights on the village of Hattin, where a well awaited. They marched in 3 squares, infantry shielding cavalry, but Saladin had other plans. His troops set fire to nearby brushwood, and the wind carried choking smoke into the Crusader ranks. The sun blazed overhead. The valley became an oven. To block their path, Saladin sent Taqi al-Din's wing galloping into the valley. His skirmishers darted in, loosed arrows, and retreated, death by 1,000 cuts. Volley after volley of arrows rained down. The Crusader infantry, dehydrated and demoralized, began to break away from the knights. Some fled east toward the horns of Hattin, others north to Nimrin. Saladin's riders opened gaps in their lines, drawing the fleeing infantry into traps. King Guy realized the army was doomed unless they broke through. But the rear was under heavy assault. The Templars and Hospitallers were locked in brutal combat. Raymond of Tripoli, seeing the chaos, made a bold decision. He gathered his knights and charged Taqi al-Din's cavalry. The Muslim riders let them pass, showering them with arrows as they retreated from the battlefield. Back in the valley, the Christian knights were dying. Guy ordered the cavalry to push toward the horns of Hattin, hoping to find water. But at the top of the hill, there was no relief, only dry pools and waiting enemies. Saladin's troops closed in. The Christian infantry, too weak to fight, were overwhelmed. The Muslims turned their attention to King Guy himself. In the chaos, Christian knights rallied around the True Cross, their most sacred relic. They retreated to the hilltop, raised Guy's red tent as a rallying point, and braced for the final assault. But the Muslims surged up the slope. In the melee, the True Cross fell into Muslim hands. The surviving knights, in a last act of desperation, charged downhill to retrieve it, briefly pushing back the Muslim line. It was a valiant but futile effort. They were out of strength, out of water, and out of time. King Guy ordered the surrender. Knights dismounted and collapsed. Guy himself was found at his tent, barely able to lift his sword. Saladin had won a monumental victory. Guy was captured, along with many nobles, including Raynald of Chatillon. Saladin, ever the gentleman, ordered ice-cold water for the king. Guy drank, then passed the cup to Raynald. Saladin turned to his interpreter. "Say to the king, it is you who give him to drink, but I give him neither to drink nor to eat." By these words, Saladin made clear, hospitality forbade him from harming a guest. But Raynald was not his guest. Saladin drew his sword and struck Raynald down, fulfilling his oath to kill the truce-breaker. The Crusader army was annihilated. Its loss was irreplaceable. Castles, towns, and cities were now defenseless. By 1188, only Tyre and Acre held out, just enough to spur Europe into launching another crusade. But that's a story for another time. Saladin was more than a warrior. He was a statesman, a scholar, and a visionary. In just 12 years he united Mesopotamia, Syria, Egypt, Eastern Libya, Western Arabia, Yemen. He built bridges of diplomacy, never broke a peace initiative, and remained humble in power. His energy was relentless, his cause unwavering, to drive the invaders out of Muslim lands. Next up, the fall of Acre. If you've been captivated by this tale of valor, vengeance, and visionary leadership, don't forget to follow us, subscribe. Click the notification bell so you never miss another epic chapter in the saga of the Crusades. Because history isn't just written, it's lived.